All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Ozzy Arroyo with the College Success Foundation. Welcome to our second webinar of the 2025-26 academic year. Today is going to be all focused on best practices in making unaccompanied homeless youth determinations. And while this is geared kind of towards campus staff, this is really useful information for anyone who is working with passport youth who are working to get that unaccompanied homeless youth determination. Um, Today we have our partners from WSAC joining us today, and also a couple of financial aid administrators from a couple of different campuses. And I will hand it off to them for introductions here in a sec, but before I do, a couple quick notes. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to drop them in the chat, and then we will get to those questions at the end. You can also wait to ask your question when that time comes as well. And a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to our Washington Passport Network website. That link will be shared out as well. And then this presentation slide deck will also be shared out to everyone who registered for this webinar. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and hand it on over to Dawn.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome. I just want to start this off by saying that some of our most frequent questions that we receive at WSAC revolve around making determinations around unaccompanied homeless youth. So this webinar is going to provide you with, I'm going to start off really easy with a program overview, just share a little bit of background information about the passport program. We're going to talk about some definitions. And then we're also going to have an opportunity where we're going to review some case studies. And we're going to lean on each other to determine, to help us make a decision on eligibility determinations through those case studies. I am here today with some really incredible people. First of all, my name is Dawn Cypriano-McAferty. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as the Assistant Director of the Passport to Careers program at the Washington Student Achievement Council. I am going to go ahead and introduce Stacia Schienbein and allow her to tell you a little bit about herself, and then our other panelists will also share their names and positions.
Thank you, Dawn. My name is Stacia Schienbein. I also use she, her pronouns, and I am the program coordinator for the Passport to Careers program, working alongside Dawn and all of you to serve our wonderful student population. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Chantel.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Chantel Fields, and I work as the Executive Director of Student Financial Resources at Bellingham Technical College. I have worked here for about 6 years, and previous to that worked in financial aid at Western Washington University. I'm going to pass it over to Angie.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Angie Hobbs. I use she, her pronouns as well. I work in the Office of Student Financial Aid at the University of Washington as the Assistant Director for Scholarships. I have been in this office for about 11 years, working directly with Passport students for about 6 or 7 of those years.
Thank you. Well, again, like I said, I'm going to go over some really broad program components. So first of all, the Passport to Careers program provides a scholarship and support services for young people who have experienced, they could have either experienced foster care or unaccompanied homelessness. And once a student is eligible for Passport, they can choose to participate in one of two pathways. They can either pursue a Passport to college and attend a college to receive a degree or a certificate, or they can participate in Passport apprenticeships through working through either registered apprenticeship programs or recognized pre-apprenticeship programs in Washington State. I did want to share the link here if you want additional information about Passport. Please visit the Passport guide. There's a whole bunch of resources that are available on the website, and including contact information for different campus support teams throughout the state of Washington. So first of all, I want to talk about, we're going to be doing a lot of discussion around definitions and verification and how we determine these, determine who's eligible for passport. So I want to stop here and just kind of pause and let you know that these are some definitions around homelessness or homeless and unaccompanied that are codified in either the program statute or the WSAC. And so first of all, here, homeless through passport program law is defined as without a fixed, regular, or adequate nighttime residence as set forth in the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. And I did include the link to the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. So when you do receive the PowerPoint, you can go ahead and click on that and look at what exactly that means. And then unaccompanied. So an unaccompanied youth is someone who meets the age requirement for the program and is experiencing homelessness while not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. And so that's, you know, an important thing to pull out is that they have to meet the age requirement and not be homeless with a parent or guardian. So how do we verify eligibility? So first of all, most of the time, a young person is determined eligible for passport through the financial aid office at the college. So what we look for is, you know, there's a whole list of things here, but a letter from a high school staff or McKinney-Vento liaison. You can have correspondence from a director or designated staff member from an emergency shelter, transitional housing, homeless youth drop-in center, or you could be a similar type of professional. So like maybe a church pastor or something that someone who has an understanding of what the young person is experiencing and that can provide that third-party documentation for that young person. And again, these are definitions that are coming directly from the program statute. So a student can also provide an essay describing their experience with homelessness and the barriers to their academic success. And we can also choose to interview that student for additional information. Now I want to pull one piece out here that's very, very important, is that a student, once they're determined eligible for passport, a student remains eligible for passport as an unaccompanied homeless youth unless there's a gap in enrollment. So say they attend fall, winter, spring, and then they take a couple quarters off and they don't come back until spring the following year. The financial aid office would then take a look at that student situation and decide whether or not they're still meeting the program requirements as an unaccompanied homeless youth for passport. But if they're continuously enrolled, with the exception of summer quarter, that determination for passport doesn't need to happen year after year. So how do we learn about young people who might be experiencing homelessness? So first of all, last year, WSAC and OSPI worked together and we developed a data share agreement that allows WSAC to receive the names of students that are experiencing unaccompanied homelessness in their senior year of high school. So that information is then provided to WSAC. The information is entered into the WSAC portal, and the financial aid office can then access that information and award the student. Another piece is either through the FAFSA or WASFA, so they have an opportunity to share if they're experiencing unaccompanied homelessness on either of those documents, and then the financial aid office would see that, and then they can verify that student's eligibility. And then finally, we provide a form called the Passport Housing Questionnaire. It's not a required document for the financial aid offices to use, but it can be used to collect information from the student for eligibility. So it can be used as a documentation tool for gathering information from the student to make that determination about their eligibility. And then finally here, I wanted to take a moment to recognize the tremendous growth in the program. So you'll see here, it's kind of hard because the screen is tiny, but in that first grid on the left, you can see the growth, the overall growth in passport. So we went from serving 940 students in the 21-22 academic year to 1,921 students in the 2004-2005 academic year. And a large part of that is because of the increasing number of unaccompanied homeless youth that are being served through the program. So again, you can see in the chart in the upper part of the right side of the slide, the blue bar is young people who've experienced foster care. The orange bar is unaccompanied homeless youth. The black bar, it's very, very tiny because we serve a very small number of tribal foster youth, but that is there. And then our unaccompanied refugee minors or federal foster youth, is that turquoise color. And then that final grid down on the bottom, it's just showing you program growth year over year. So you can see that the program is expanding tremendously, pretty rapidly as well. Okay, and I will go ahead and hand it over to my partner.
Thanks, Dawn. So I will be going through some definitions to just kind of describe what the process looks like from a financial aid perspective in terms of making determinations for unaccompanied homeless youth students. Typically, I wouldn't present on like reading definitions to a group of listeners, but I think in this scenario, it is really important to understand and have an in-depth understanding of what these definitions are so that we're making the determinations appropriately. So first, I want to get started just to kind of differentiate between the McKinney-Vento Act and unaccompanied homeless youth. We in financial aid offices a lot of times are familiar with the terminology of unaccompanied homeless youth, but where that terminology comes from is the federal McKinney-Vento Education of Homeless Child and Youth Assistance Act. And this is a law that a lot of folks in the K-12 system work really closely with. There's language in this law that guides the K-12 system on ensuring that there's no interruption in a young person's ability to enroll in the K-12 system and receive specialized sort of support so that they can have stability while they're experiencing homelessness. And the definitions in McKinney-Vento are what we use for making our unaccompanied homeless youth determinations for financial aid purposes. So unaccompanied homeless youth is a criteria that allows us to consider a student to be independent for financial aid purposes, which means they're able to file a FAFSA or a WASFA without parental information. And so the main point here that I have underlined is when we're making determinations for UHY, we're looking for this specific definition to be met. So it's an unaccompanied youth who is either homeless or is self-supporting and at risk of homelessness. So when we're doing a determination, we're having a meeting with a student or reviewing a letter or some sort of documentation that they're provided, we're looking to meet that they've met each and every one of these criteria. So I'm going to go through and kind of define what each of these terms mean in the context of the McKinney-Vento Act. So first, what does it mean to be unaccompanied? Unaccompanied is a student who is not living in the physical custody of a parent or legal guardian. So we have had scenarios where we've done determinations where the student is in a homeless situation, living in a homeless shelter with their parent. And unfortunately, that doesn't meet the definition of UHY. They are not unaccompanied. So this, what we're looking for in making determinations is that the student is not living with their parent or guardian. I think a lot of coming from a college that had on-campus housing, we kind of grappled with this a bit. When a student's living in campus housing, they're not in the physical custody of their parent or guardian. So we would go to the next sort of tier of, are they at risk of homelessness? And I'll get into that definition on the next slide in a minute. Then youth, this is any student that is at a certain age. So they'd otherwise be dependent for financial aid purposes due to their age. And for this current academic year, 25-26 academic year, that would mean the student is born on or after January 1st of 2002. And with that birth date, they'd be required to provide parental information or contributor information on the FAFSA or the WASFA, but they could go through this determination process and potentially be considered independent as a UHY. Homeless, this is where there are specific definitions and guidelines in the McKinney-Vento Act that we pay close attention to. I think we could all sort of make our own independent assessment of what homeless means. But in some cases, I have seen colleges applying a little bit more of a restrictive restrictive approach to making their determinations because their personal opinion about what they think homeless is different than the actual definition. So what we're looking for on this category is that the person is lacking regular, adequate, and fixed housing. And then the McKinney-Vento Act goes into detail and define what does regular mean, what does adequate mean, and what is fixed. So take a minute here and kind of go through some examples on these three definitions. So regular housing, it's housing that's predictable, routine, and consistent. So it, what that would mean is there's a mortgage, there's rent, there's a lease. The housing is stable, predictable. The student can rely on that housing for a span of time. Next category is adequate. So the housing needs to be sufficient to meet the physical and psychological needs of the student, for the student. What could be considered not adequate housing is the student is living in a mobile home and the roof is leaking and there's no running water to that. That's not adequate housing to meet the physical needs of the student. So you could determine a person living in that scenario to be considered homeless. And then fixed is the housing is stationary and permanent and not subject to change. So obviously a house, an apartment, condo, those kinds of things would be fixed housing. Types of housing that are not fixed would be like a student living in a car, obviously, or a student living in an RV where that RV gets moved based on their inability to leave it in a fixed location for an extended period of time. Can move on to the next slide. Okay, so I just want to touch back to on the left side of this slide where what the definition we're looking for is unaccompanied youth who is either homeless or self-supporting and at risk of homelessness. So this is the or category. If you have a student that you've already determined that they're unaccompanied and that they are a youth, but they may not be currently homeless, this will be sort of your next step is, are they self-supporting and at risk of homelessness? So self-supporting, the student pays for their own living expenses, which could include housing. So the student could be considered self-supporting if they have a full-time job while they're attending school and they pay rent, their name is on a lease, that could be considered, they are self-supporting. And then the at-risk category applies when a student's housing might cease to be fixed, regular, and adequate. So this could be an example of a student who's being evicted or they're being asked to leave the place that they're staying at or living at, and they have not been able to find or don't anticipate being able to find fixed, regular, and adequate housing. So scenario, I would, to provide an example of a student that's self-supporting and at risk of homelessness is a student has a full-time job or 30 hours a week, whatever it is that provides enough income for them to meet all of their living expenses, but that job is seasonal, or that job might be, they're kind of expecting that it might end at some point in time, and they're feeling like they're unsure about where they're going to, their ability to meet their living expenses for the apartment or house that they're on a lease for. So that could be a scenario where a student is self-supporting and at risk of homelessness. Even though they're in an apartment, they're not currently homeless, they could be considered UHY because they're at risk of homelessness. And this introduces a lot of sort of need to have in-depth conversations with students and ask a lot of questions and kind of get into that scenario where you have to get a lot of information and build trust with the student so that they can share details about their personal situation. A big thing for me is I hear a lot of people who make UHY determinations and say, no, a person's not UHY when I believe they really are. And so I just encourage anyone making determinations to not be more strict than what the law states. So first, I pulled a couple of quotes from the Federal Student Aid Handbook and from the FAFSA instructions, just to make a couple of points here. So the FAFSA handbook specifically says that the reason that a student is homeless doesn't matter. So we are specifically instructed to not make our decisions based on why someone might be experiencing homelessness or might be considered at risk of homelessness. So asking some questions to kind of understand the situation. I find myself doing that a little bit just so I can understand enough of their circumstances to make a good determination, but the reasons never factor into my decision. And then the second quote here about timing is, this is the directions on the FAFSA itself. So it's saying that a student can answer yes, that they are an unaccompanied homeless youth if at any time on or after July 1st of 2024, they are unaccompanied homeless or self-supporting and at risk of homelessness. So what this means is it's at any time. It doesn't need to be the entire year they were a UHY. And there's no definition of a length of time. So it could be as little as one night for a student to have experienced unaccompanied homeless youth. All those definitions and those, you could move forward with making a determination if they had experienced homelessness at any time on or after that date. And I'd say to be careful about making sure that you check the year on each new annual FAFSA or WASFA application, just to make sure you're catching that. And I believe this next slide will be Angie.
Thank you, Chantel. So I'll talk a little bit about making UHY determinations and how we do that within the financial aid office. As Chantel mentioned, we will make determinations based off of what the student lets us know. So most students are going to let us know their circumstances. I would say the majority are going to let us know by completing their FAFSA or their WASFA. They'll be selecting one of those options that will say that they are unaccompanied homeless youth, and usually they will indicate how they have been determined this, or if they can indicate that, then this is the documentation that would be needed based off of how they have answered their FAFSA or their WASFA. So documentation from certain outside entities include local educational agency, homeless liaison, director of an emergency or transitional shelter, director of the TRIO program, or financial aid administrator at a different institution. You also, if the student selects that they don't have any of this documentation, then we would make a determination on a case-by-case basis by using professional judgment. So normally if a student comes into our office and they mention that they are unaccompanied homeless youth, after we have read the definition of UHY and we know what that means, we discuss this with the student and try to determine if they meet those the unaccompanied homeless youth criteria. So that can just be a determination that is made through our office. Next slide, please. So continuing with making determinations, institutions must review for all requests for UHY determinations. So once a student has indicated that, whether it be on their FAFSA or their WASFA, or they've come in and maybe mentioned it to our office, we will make that determination within 60 days after the student is enrolled in their classes. FAA's financial aid administrators must consider documentation from certain entities to be adequate. The reason a student is unaccompanied and or homeless cannot be factored into the determination and not required to verify the answers or require additional supporting documentation unless there is conflicting information. Next slide. So for both University of Washington and Bellingham Technical College, we have some examples of some of the staff that works with our passport students and our unaccompanied homeless youth students. For University of Washington, we have our financial aid staff. Myself and a few of my staff members work directly with our passport students. All of our staff is equipped to make UHY determinations, but we also have an office on our campus called the Champions Program that assists specifically with unaccompanied homeless youth and passport students, and that they just help with academic advising and any kind of counseling support that's needed. Bellingham Technical College has designated financial aid staff for UHY determinations and other processing. They have passport DSS and financial aid, and same staff are closely connected with emergency funding committees. Next slide. So one thing that I find super important when working with passport students is being able to work collaboratively with our partners on campus and just making sure that students really aren't slipping through the cracks. They don't have as much support as maybe a student who is in contact with their family or isn't in a precarious situation with at risk or homelessness. So I find that working with campus partners is really important just because we can kind of connect them to other offices and help them navigate throughout their college experience. So really just addressing equity by ensuring timely processing of all of their unaccompanied homeless youth documentation. I know for the University of Washington, I work very closely with the Champions program. And then also in doing that, we can kind of help connect them to other things such as housing, any type of academic advising. If they have any sort of emergency needs, we can also help them navigate that either on or off campus. Next slide. Which kind of leads me into collaborative work with off-campus support. So working with Passport Network, McKinney-Vivento liaisons, knowing what resources are available in your community, DSHS, local food assistance, and local resources. There's a link there for Building Coalition, and then also working with other financial aid professionals. I know that Dawn has open office hours, which I believe she's going to talk about later. So she's also a great resource. Also, Stacia is a great resource if you have any questions and you're just not sure right off the bat if a student's meeting an unaccompanied homeless youth situation, or if there are resources that maybe you're not familiar with. Next slide. I'll turn this over to Chantel.
All right, so we are going to go through some case studies and invite you to participate and sort of let us know what you think about these case studies. These case studies came from real live examples that Angie and I both have experienced in our time making UHY determinations. So these are real stories from students. Okay, so number one is the students living with this brother, the brother's partner in an apartment they're renting. The older brother and the partner are breaking up, and they are going to move out. They've been given their notice that they're moving out of the apartment. The student who is living in that apartment is not on the lease agreement, and he's just kind of been informally living there, just kind of staying there and contributing a little bit of the toward the expenses for the last 2 years. We did get documentation from the student of the 30-day notice stating that they're going to be leaving this apartment. The brother is going to move out of town, and the student is going to stay in town to continue with their education, and says that they'll probably stay with a friend starting at the end of the month to give themselves some time to save up some money to cover the first and last month's rent of a deposit on a new apartment of their own. So any thoughts on whether you would make a UHY determination for this student? So what we're looking for is this person, first, are they unaccompanied and are they a youth? And then second step is, are they lacking regular, fixed, and adequate housing? And if they're not, are they self-supporting and at risk of homelessness? So does anyone have any thoughts on what you might do with this scenario?
And feel free to just jump in and discuss. I'm sorry, I can't see the chat. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, so the chat says is asking if how old the student is. So let's assume that the student is under the age of 24, that they do meet the definition of youth.
Well, sorry, it has to be under the age of 22 for the passport side.
Sure, correct. That's a good distinction to make. And I think for this case study, we're looking at UHY determinations, and then after the determination, then we would assess eligibility for passport. But yeah, that's a great.
Okay, so a question for me, nowhere in here did it really sink into my head about the parents, other than he's living with the brother. Is there still a relationship with the parents? Or has that been cut off?
My understanding is that it doesn't matter if there's still a relationship with the parents, it's whether or not the parents provide any of the students' living expenses. Like if they pay for anything, you can still have a relationship with your parents and be UHY.
Yeah, so the UHY definitions, and this kind of again going to, if you're just strictly going based on the definitions, and it kind of forces you to ignore all of what you already know, which is challenging. There's nothing in the UHY determination that specifies that contact with the parent needs to be factored in. So the relationship with the parent doesn't matter. Whether they talk with them doesn't matter. So in this case, we're strictly just looking at, I think we've already checked off that they are a youth. So next we're trying to figure out if they're unaccompanied. And I think for this case, I would say, yes, they are unaccompanied. They're not currently homeless, but they're at risk of homelessness, I would say, because the brother is not going to continue living in that place. They're going to have nowhere to go. But we don't have information here that suggests that the student has enough to cover that they're self-supporting. So I'd probably be asking some more questions of how are you self-supporting, and maybe at risk of homelessness. And in the chat, Beth is saying that the relationship with the parent matters if it's a dependency override, but not UHY. So yeah, that's if you're doing a petition for independency, then that is a very important factor in approving petitions, but is not factored into the UHY definitions.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
so
have a
this
question.
Yes, thank you.
So I was thinking about the petition for independence as well. So if a student is determined to be UHY for passport, they don't necessarily also have to be determined as independent by financial aid. They can be separate, or
so if you are making a UHY determination, that would mean the student becomes independent, or they're considered independent for financial aid purposes.
even if they have a relationship with their parents.
Correct.
Okay.
I think about it as kind of the end goal being different. It's that when you do, we call them dependency overrides, but whatever. When you're doing a dependency override, it's because the student doesn't have contact with their parents and therefore can't get their parents' tax information to add. So it's not that you're trying to make them independent, it's that you're trying to get around the fact that it is not safe or they are unable to contact their parents to get the tax information. UHY is more about you're trying to make them independent, not because they can't get their parents' tax information, but because they meet all of these criteria as being UHY. And that is a path to getting them to passport, even if they're too old to end up getting passport. Does that make sense to people? It's kind of like a different goal.
Yeah, and another example, kind of recent scenario we're seeing is, let's say you have a student whose parents were deported and they are not able to continue living in the same house that their parents were paying rent for. That student might still have very close contact with their parent and continue to maintain a very close relationship with their parent, but they become unaccompanied and potentially at risk of homelessness or homeless at the point that their parents are deported, and that meets the UHY criteria. And I would agree that yes, it is very confusing, and it really requires you to think of UHY determinations and dependency overrides as two completely separate. There's no overlap. It challenges you to think of things in brand new ways that, I don't know, I don't know, for me, I was so stuck on on the petition route that it really took a matter of like rereading and over again, reading the definitions and questioning my own determinations to check and see if I was on the right track. So, okay, out of interest of time, I do want to move on to the next case study. Next one is the student moved into campus housing during fall quarter. Before this, they were living with their parent in an abandoned building, and the place they were staying at was a storage closet. I think it was like I don't know, it was an abandoned building. The student had McKinney-Vento designation from their high school. The mom says that she's still in this abandoned building living situation, but she's only allowed to stay there week to week and might be asked to leave 1 day per week. The student first stated that he has nowhere else to go except he's thankful that he had access to the campus housing option. If he was not able to stay in that campus housing option, he would go live with his mom in the abandoned building. So for this purpose, we'll also assume that the student is under the age of 22. And so first we're looking at, are they unaccompanied? And I think while the student is living in campus housing, yes, they're unaccompanied. They're not living in the physical presence of parent or guardian. Are they homeless? No, the student's living in campus housing, so they have access to regular and fixed and adequate housing. So then that sort of secondary category is, are they self-supporting and at risk of homelessness? And what is available here in this slide, we don't know if the student is self-supporting, and they're at risk of homelessness, I would say does not meet the UHY definitions because they would potentially return to a homeless situation with the parent. So therefore they'd not be unaccompanied. So what kind of discussions or thoughts do we have about this one? Or do you disagree with the determination that I may have made?
Like most anybody, it's a hair's breadth from one side to the other. I'm eligible for food, but I'm not because I'm $10 over. That's what this scenario reminds me of.
Yeah. Exactly. It's a terrible situation. The student has had to live like this. And unfortunately, we have the difficult job of having to tell them that they don't qualify for support funding.
I have a question. Sorry, I'm going to interrupt.
Sure.
Ariana here. I've had similar scenarios, and sometimes I'm not the one who makes the determination for the college. I'm the passport designated support staff, but there's also financial aid staff who does that. In scenarios like this, I have seen that they take the piece of what, because we don't have on dorms, right? So I know the scenario is a little bit different, but
Yeah.
I kind of think of, they were McKinney-Vento at their high school, but they were not unaccompanied McKinney-Vento at their high school. So I think there's so much, it's kind of what Laura said, where I'm trying to kind of really look at it, but I think every college maybe does it a little bit different depending on their situation and what resources they have and like kind of what scenarios they have. Like, I don't have dorms. That's not going to be a scenario that ever will happen in my at my college. So if from my situation, I would have been like the McKinney-Vento, the unaccompanied was never there. So that wouldn't be the situation. And so I guess I'm just kind of confused as to why we're determining as a dorm at the college as their housing, and that's what they would be, we'd be considering them as, like, did you say not homeless because of the dorm at their housing? Is that what you said?
Yeah, and I think that sort of, to go back to the definitions, is would you consider the dorm to be regular, fixed, and adequate housing? And a student living in a dorm and they anticipate living there for an entire year or multiple years, you could make the case that that's regular, adequate, and fixed. But there could be scenarios where you'd say, no, this isn't regular housing because they're only allowed to stay there for 1 quarter. That's all they have funding for. And they're at risk of homelessness because they're going to need to move out at a point in time that you kind of anticipate coming up in the future. So I think that's where it involves a lot of discussion with students and kind of what ifs. And the more information that you can obtain from the student, trying to tie it back to those definitions is that's kind of your guide is in making those decisions. Is this regular and fixed and adequate housing, and on-campus housing could potentially be considered not regular, adequate, and fixed. And Laura, perfect example. Is it open during break periods? Are they going to be displaced? That could be some criteria that you factor into your determination to decide that that's not regular, adequate, and fixed housing.
Yeah. So I guess to clarify, what I want to know is, for example, let's say the dorms were not a fixed, like they weren't going to be able to stay there, like you said. And then they are self-supporting, or they're relying on themselves. They don't have any support from parents. Would they be unaccompanied at this piece if the part of the fact that they would be going back to live with mom, if that wasn't an option? I guess that's the part where technically they wouldn't be unaccompanied because, so in this scenario, would they ever actually be eligible for it? I guess it's kind of my question. If it was,
I think if the student was telling you, I have this housing situation right now, and if I didn't have the ability to stay where I'm staying right now, I would go back to a homeless situation with my parent. I think that student could still I would imagine they'd qualify for a substantial amount of financial aid with parental information on their FAFSA or their WASFA, but maybe not qualify for passport. So
Okay.
that's kind of what we're like, my approach. I'm always trying to find a path forward. And sometimes it means
Right.
I don't make the determination, but let's support you and your parent in getting this application filed as quickly as possible so we can move forward with awarding a full Pell and a full Washington College grant award and
Okay.
providing funds that way.
All right. Thank you. I think that's kind of where my brain was, where it's like, I didn't think there was a scenario where they could be eligible, but I was a little bit confused by how, we went through it, everything, but
Yeah.
it makes sense now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Number 3, this student claimed unaccompanied homeless youth. Let's see, discussion with the student revealed that they believed that, so there's kind of self-identifying as being at risk of homelessness. Students explained that they'd been living in an apartment with roommates and moved to another apartment because they were uncomfortable. They had a roommate issue falling out, happens so often. Upon further review, the student went from one apartment to another without a break in housing. There wasn't a single night in which they had no access. Sorry, they had no access to housing. They terminated their lease 2 weeks before moving, and they moved into the new apartment before the lease was terminated. So and again, we're assuming the student is under the age of 22. So any thoughts on this one?
We would want to ask about the new apartment. Like, are they on the lease? Do they have their own room? Are they sleeping on a couch? Are they doubling up in our, that kind of stuff?
Mhm.
Like what happened in the old apartment is no longer pertinent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if there was no break in housing, they didn't have one night where they were, staying in inadequate housing, and they just went from one apartment to the other. And are they on the new lease now? Can they pay their rent there consistently?
Exactly. So the student's not homeless, but could they be at risk of homelessness depending on all the circumstances? Okay, so we'll go on to number 4, and I think Angie's going to take it away.
Sorry, my internet has been freezing up, so I will do my very best. So student submitted a FAFSA without parental information. She reached out to the financial aid office to let us know that she is homeless and wanted to talk about her options. The financial aid administrator used their UHY determination form to document whether the student meets UHY definitions. When the student was asked where they are living, the student indicated that she lives in a homeless shelter. When asked who else is staying with her in the shelter, the student indicated that it was just her and her mother, and that they became homeless after escaping an abusive household. They left behind most of their belongings and escaped in the middle of the night. So I think first, as with most of these case studies, we would assume that the student meets the youth aspect, so being 22 or younger or under 22. And then also looking first if are they homeless or are they unaccompanied? So I'm not sure if you all have thoughts about this one.
Well, she's with her mom, right? So she's not unaccompanied.
Right. So meeting the homeless, being in a homeless shelter, but being with her mom makes her so she's not unaccompanied. So she would not be eligible for passport. I mean, obviously, this is a difficult situation, and I would certainly take additional steps beyond just you know, determining their passport eligibility, but for passport purposes, this would not be an eligible student. You take this one, Chantel? I can continue.
Yeah, I can if you're, sorry, I just saw your chat that your
Oh,
internet wasn't too
it
good.
seems to be working right now. It was just freezing up there. But I'm
Okay.
happy to continue if you'd like.
Okay, sure.
So for this one, a 20-year-old student notified college that they had experienced homelessness in the last year. The student told staff that they had been living with family and is in contact with their mom. The student's mother called college staff to request assistance for her son and mentioned that she's helping him with the FAFSA. The mom indicated that the student was living in an RV without running water, paying rent to the landowner in Bellingham while the mother lived in Port Townsend. The mother indicated that he's doing all of this by choice. So this one is a little bit, I would say, more gray. This is definitely, in my opinion, more of a conversation with a student to find out a little bit more information. What are all of your thoughts?
I feel like they would, because they're technically unaccompanied since the mom doesn't live with them. They are youth. And I mean, this is just based off the examples we were going over earlier, but it doesn't sound like an RV without running water is meeting physical needs. I don't know if it really would matter if the mom saying he's doing this all by choice. I feel like it's based on the student in the student interview, but that might be what might be confusing me. I'm not sure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they're meeting the youth aspect. They're definitely not in adequate housing. They are unaccompanied. I would probably want to talk with a student to, you know, if it's a further situation where maybe is there a break in the relationship with the mom, but as far as UHY goes, that it doesn't really, I don't think that aspect matters in this situation.
I think
I
for
would,
me, this is one of those that's like an uncomfortable scenario where we all, working in financial aid, we're always under the impression that if you have contact with the parent, that sort of wipes out any potential of an independency status. But under UHY, the contact with the parents is no part of the definitions for making UHY determinations. So even though the mother is contacting the school or the student and the parent have contact with each other, none of those things really factor into making the determination. And so for this one, I would most likely approve this one as a UHY. It's the RV without running water I'd say is not adequate housing.
I think another thing with this example is the fact that the mother is in Port Townsend.
Mhm.
So he wouldn't be able to even be living with the mother and attend school in Bellingham. So I feel like
Yeah.
that's another aspect as well.
We actually are careful to remind people that when they're making these determinations, we actually shouldn't even be asking about the why. Like, it doesn't matter why the student is choosing to live like this. That has no implication. Like, it has no impact on our determination. So we just don't even ask. Like, if they volunteer it, then that's cool, but we actually like explicitly train people not to ask about the why.
That kind of goes back to what Chantel was saying earlier about we just need, look at the definitions and see if they meet that. Okay, we have about 3 minutes left. We do have one more case study, but we also have some resources that we want to get to. So I think what we'll do is we will go ahead and skip the case study number 6. But take a look at it when you have access to the presentation, and you can think about it now. And then reach back out to us if you want, if it's something you want to discuss, go ahead and reach back out to us. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over. Were there any other questions that came up? You know, what questions do you have about supporting unaccompanied homeless youth? What are your experiences? What challenges are you facing? And what new ideas are you going to be bringing back to your campus? So think about these things as well. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Stacia just so that you have access to the resources, and she's going to go ahead and touch on that.
Thanks, Dawn. I'm just going to rip through these really quickly since we're getting really close on time. We did want to provide you all with some additional resources to assist you in making these UHY determinations, as complicated as they are. The first ones listed here is the specific policy, which you can look at. The Federal Student Aid Office created these Dear Colleague letters. There's a jillion of them, but these two in particular kind of speak pretty specifically to the FAFSA Simplification Act, the UHY determinations, definitions, and explain a little bit more clearly how you can advise your students on completing the FAFSA when they might meet these criteria. Next is just a couple of more resources. First of all, we want to highlight office hours with WSAC that I believe Chantel mentioned earlier, or excuse me, it may have been Angie. These are going to be virtual meetings that occur on the first Friday of every month from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. It's an opportunity for you to check in with our team, share news from your institution, and address any questions that you might have, including difficult UHY scenarios or cases that you might be currently working on. If you'd like an invitation to that meeting, please drop your email address in the chat and we'll make sure to get that invitation out to you. The next 4 resources listed are a sampling of national organizations, groups, and programs that are all aimed at providing instruction, resource materials, and other support for the general population, but more specifically for people like yourselves who are direct supporting UHY students. So we'd encourage you to check out each of the websites for helpful information and trainings in your work with this population. Next slide, please. So this is an example of one of the resources is created by the National Center for Homeless Education. This is an unaccompanied youth eligibility flow chart, which might help you to make those UHY determinations on your campus and serves as a general guide to assist you as you're working with individual students. We'll put the address of where the chart can be accessed in the chat so that you can have immediate access to it. And then the same is true for the next slide, which is a tip sheet for UHYs provided by Schoolhouse Connection in partnership with NASFA. This tip sheet was designed to help students tackle some of those tricky questions on the FAFSA as it relates to determining their status as a UHY. We'd recommend making the flyer available on your website, your institution website, or maybe even printing some out to have on hand when working with students directly. Again, we're going to put the address of where this tip sheet can be accessed in the chat, but as a reminder, you'll also be able to find these items when the slide deck for this presentation is made available at the conclusion of this webinar.
And with that, we just want to thank you again for joining us today. We did it with, with one minute over. Our contact information is below, so please feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any questions or if there's things that you'd like to discuss about, determining eligibility for unaccompanied homeless youth. So thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you at the next training next month.
I believe our next webinar is scheduled for early December.
Got it.
And just a quick note, you can visit our website. I'll drop a link in the chat to stay up to date on all upcoming events. And also if you want to sign up for our Washington Passport Network newsletter, if you're not already signed up for that, there's also a contact us button if you want to reach out and have any questions. Yeah, thanks again. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Dawn, Stacia, Chantel, and Angie. we will see you at the next webinar.